This is a Veterans History Project oral history interview with Mr. Henry Rapalus. Today is Saturday, January 14th, 2006. Mr. Rapalus, would you please state your full name and date of birth?
Henry Walter Rapalus, R-A-P-A-L-U-S. I was born on March 12th, 1923.
Where were you born?
And I was born in East Hampton, one word, East Hampton, Massachusetts.
Where did you grow up? Where were you raised?
In East Hampton. It was a beautiful community. It was a small town. It was a cotton town, meaning that all the cotton that was brought in from the south and then changed into string and material for clothing.
Were there many children in your family?
3. One older boy and one younger boy.
Where did you go to school?
I went to school in Sacred Heart School in East Hampton. It was a parochial school. Then I went 1 year to East Hampton High School, and then I finished 3 years in Smith's Vocational School in Northampton, Mass.
Why did you go to Smith's Vocational School?
Well, I didn't have any aspirations of becoming a college man or anything, so my dad and I sat down one day and we had a nice little talk and decided the best thing for me to become a technician. And he really taught me a lot about plumbing, about wiring, and so that's what I liked. I liked that field, so I became an electrician.
How far is Northampton from East Hampton?
About 12 miles.
Did you commute to that school?
We had, my brother and I, my younger brother and I, both went there. We had bicycles, so we'd, in the summertime or in the fall, spring, we'd go bicycle, and in the wintertime, my dad arranged for us to ride in a rumble seat of this car. We'd cover ourselves with old army blankets, and that was our transportation.
About how old were you when you started at Northampton at the technical school? Do you remember?
Oh, probably about 13.
13?
No, 14.
So this would have been about 1937.
Yes.
This would have been in the middle of the Depression.
Yes.
Was a part of the opportunity for you to go to Northampton because of the Depression era and the economy at the time?
Yes, my mother was a seamstress when she came to this country from Poland, and eventually had a store of our own where she used to distribute the clothes that she sewed for local neighbors and parishioners. And eventually she ran one of the most prosperous stores in town. And so I grew up fishing in the pond that was behind the store and ice skating in the wintertime, and it was just beautiful, beautiful way to grow up.
When did you graduate from the Northampton Technical School? Do you remember?
In 1940.
And would you have been 17 at the time?
Yes.
All right, so it's 1940 and you're 17 years old. And what skills do you now have as having gone through this technical school?
Well, it helped me a great deal because I qualified to be a master electrician, but I went to Eastern Radio Institute in Boston to try to expand my knowledge in radio so I could maybe get in the merchant marine and become a radio operator on one of the merchant marine ships. But like you say, the Depression, we ran out of money, and so my folks were sending my oldest son to a prep school, which was expensive, so he could get into either the Naval Academy or the Coast Guard Academy. And he succeeded in getting in the Coast Guard Academy, and graduated from there and served and retired as a commander in the Coast Guard, as a flyer.
Now, when you came out of the Northampton, what did you do right after the high school then, in 1930?
Well, I went to Eastern Radio Institute because I got introduced to what was communications, and it dealt with TRF, tuned radio frequency receivers, and introduction to super heterodyne receivers, and I was extremely interested in that. And so, like I mentioned, my dad got me to Eastern Radio Institute, and so I rented an apartment just across the river from MIT, and I'd go to school every day, and I stayed there for about 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
No, 4 months. And during that 4 months, things got worse because my mother had the store, and people used to come in, oh, Mrs. Rapalus, my husband's not been working, and you know how often, and my children need some clothes to go to school, and my mother just had them sign a little book, and so she had a book full of names and money that people owed her and all that. And so we decided the best thing for me to do is not try to beat somebody out of a job, and because I was a qualified electrician, just to go ahead and join the Navy. The Navy would have plenty of tools, it would have many opportunities and all that, so join there and see what you can do. And so that's what I did. On the 14th of January 1941, I left home and reported recruiting station. That's where I found out something funny too, because I went to recruiting station, they wouldn't take me because I didn't have my birth certificate. So we went to the town hall to get my birth certificate, and I wasn't registered. And so they had to run up a new one. It turns out that they had somebody there who was Henry Walter Rapalus, not Henry Thomas, because Thomas was my father's name, and so I was named the middle name after him. But my father's brother, who went to register me at the town hall, used his middle name instead of his dad's, and so all the way through grade school and communion and confirmation and parochial school, everything I've got is Henry Thomas. And then when I got my birth certificate, everything changed. Henry Walter.
Became Henry Walter Rapalus.
Yeah.
Now, tell me a little bit again. In 1940, you graduate from Northampton Technical Institute, the technical school.
Mm-hmm.
You moved to Boston for some
Eastern Radio Institute.
To Eastern Radio Institute. You were there for about 6 months, and then a family decision was made that the best opportunity, couldn't afford to continue to go to school there, to join the Navy. And you had discussed this with your father,
right,
and decided that that was a good opportunity. Was there any concern at that point, because war had broken out in Europe, that you might, or the United States might be?
What was interesting was that we used to go to watch these movies that were smuggled out of Poland, and my uncle had the only theater in town, so whenever he got any of these movies, there'd be a special for the Polish parish, for all the people to come in and see what's going on in Poland. And so that's the only exposure, really. I didn't have anything else to make me think of war, because nobody thought about it at that time. War is across the ocean. Don't worry about it.
It's sort of abstract. It's not nearby. Now, where did you, when you reported to the Navy and you got the birth certificate issue straightened out, where was that happened? Where did you go? Was that in East Hampton?
No, that was in Springfield, Massachusetts, at the post office.
At the post office?
Yes.
And when you got that straightened out with the birth certificate, the correct birth certificate to enlist, right?
They swore me in.
They swore you in.
And then transferred me to Newport, Rhode Island.
All right, let's talk a little bit about that. When you swore in, who was with you with the swearing in?
Myself.
You just went down on your own. And that was a typical thing at that time. You sounded like someone who you went out on your own and did that.
Right.
And you're the middle son,
yes,
correct? And how far is Springfield from East Hampton?
about 20 miles.
How did you get to Springfield to
I
swear?
called a friend of mine and he gave me a ride.
He gave you a ride down. Did he enlist with you?
No, he just a friend of mine, so he gave me a ride.
Yeah.
See, I had one brother who served during the war as a flyer pilot, co-pilot on a B-29 in the Pacific, and the other brother went through the Coast Guard Academy, and he flew air-sea rescue flights and did sea duty aboard some of the icebreakers during the war in the Atlantic.
When Springfield, you were to report to Newport, Rhode Island?
Yes.
How did you get to Newport?
They had a bus.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were about 6 or 7 of us got on a bus and went to Newport.
And this is 1940.
41.
41, I'm sorry.
January 41.
January 1941. And Newport, Rhode Island.
Yes.
And how long does it take to get from Springfield to Newport? Do you remember?
Well, we left in the afternoon, but we didn't get there till in the evening. Judge, 6 hours, 7 hours.
Now, what do you recall about reporting at Newport? What was that like when you reported to Newport?
A new world.
Tell me.
Well, first thing, you get off the bus, and of course everybody screaming, all right, go, fall in line. Attention, everybody stand there. And then they'd read off your name and you'd holler here.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'd go ahead and march you out to the barracks. And the detention barracks were brand new. That was beautiful. And in detention, you're locked up for 4 weeks, I guess it is. And of course, you get your shots, you get everything during that period of time. And if there's any wrong with you or you're still sick, then they'll take you to the hospital and take care of you before you go, join the fleet.
So that was a period of about 4 weeks?
Yes, and then after detention, then he went through what they call recruit training.
So tell me about this detention time, this 4-week detention time. Are you kept inside?
Yes, there's a chain link fence built around this building. And the only time you went outside the building is when you formed outside, and they checked your clothing inspection, see what you looked like and all that, and whether you were clean shaven. And so it was just a place where they put you away for 4 weeks, and just watched over you like a hawk.
Now, when you got there, into this is in Newport. This is the induction center area, right?
No, this is a training center.
A training center?
Yeah, it's a naval training center. In other words, they had them in Norfolk, they had them in California and all that, but that was a main
training?
for here.
So as the raw recruits come in,
Oh, yes.
and you're processed through,
Right.
and is this where you're issued your uniforms?
Yes.
And is this where all the training, the beginnings of your training are formed?
Exactly. Introduction into the Navy system.
Now, do they, where do they keep you during those first 4 weeks? Where do you stay?
In a barracks.
In a barracks?
Usually the sleeping quarters were maybe about 20 men, bunk beds and a locker. And then you had a community shower and bathroom. And that's about it.
Tell me again, when you went into the Navy in January of 1941, how long had you enlisted for? What was your time period, your commitment?
Minority cruise. You go in at 17 and you're out on your 21st birthday. Something special, So I signed up for that. And,
did you have to have your parents? You had to have your parents' permission.
Oh, yes.
Right, because at that time, how old did you have to be to get into the?
17.
You had to be at least 17 to get in, and you were just under 17 then, right? You were 17.
I was 17.
You were just under 18.
Yeah.
You were just under 18, and so when you're at Newport and the bunks, now were they single bunks? Were they double bunks? Or were they just double bunks? And your days. What time are you getting up in the morning? Do you remember? when you're in?
5 o'clock.
And it's still in this detention type setting,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And you formed up and did training. Is that what the kinds of things you would
formed
do?
up, then you went to chow.
Okay.
And then after chow, you came back and got cleaned up, and then you went out and drilled for a while.
Mm-hmm.
To just the basic formality. How do you line up, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, how do you take orders? Right face, left face. And
Mm-hmm. Now, tell me more about the end of that 4-week time period. What happens?
well, it's when you didn't have time to even think because they kept you so busy and so active. I mean, in fact, to get into the Navy, I had one cavity in one of my teeth, and so the recruiting officer wouldn't take me unless I got that fixed up. So he went to the dentist, got it fixed up real fast, and I got to boot camp, and we're out there drilling away, and I looked, and I had a note in my pocket saying you had a dental appointment for 2 o'clock or so, and it was already 3. So I showed it to the chief, and the chief says, well, you better get going now, hurry up. So I quickly grabbed my rifle and gas mask and the whole thing that we drilled with, and took off for the dental office. I got there and everybody was all cleaning up and going home except for one dentist. And he says, I'll take him. So I ran over there and he looked, and he gave me a shot and then pulled a tooth out, which we just had fixed up and everything else. And they're just in a hurry. And that's the first time that I got the feeling that you're not a human being, you're a name and a number. You just fit into the system, you know. And so from there on, you've got to watch out for the job.
What about your time? Let's see. You talked about what happened at the end of that 4 weeks then, after they've given you all that.
Well, then you went ahead and got transferred to regular recruit training,
Mm-hmm.
and you had access to the whole base. And then you could go to the church, you could go to the library, you could go to movies, and you could take time out to scrub your clothes and, get them clean and all that.
This is like February of 1941.
Yes.
Now, how long is this regular recruit training taking? What's that time period?
I didn't get out of there until about March. I got out of there in time for my birthday for March 12th. I was home on recruit leave for a week. Then when I reported back, the base was quarantined. So I report with my orders, and the officer Day says, you can't go on base, it's quarantined. You have to go aboard the Constellation, which was the flagship, was the old iron frigate that's now anchored in Baltimore Harbor. And so I reported aboard her, and it was just like being back in boot camp, meaning in detention, because after the detention for a week, we shifted over to new barracks, but the barracks didn't have any beds or anything else. They just had great big pipes strung out through the whole big area, and then you lashed up your hammock and put your sea bag underneath your hammock, and that's the way you lived. And so it was on a Constellation the same way. And then they cleared the base and everything else, whatever they had worn, quarantined it, cleared up, and then they sent me along with others to radio school in San Diego, California.
All right. So it's radio school, and was this, what is this about, March of 41, April?
About April at least.
Now, and quickly, your basic training, as we went back over it from your time in Newport, there's, how was that, again, a barracks-like situation that they kept you in? You had to move to a different barrack, right?
In Newport.
In Newport,
Yes,
yeah.
except that it didn't have bunk beds. The final place I stayed was, they had what they call jack stays, which are pipes about 2 inches diameter, just running across the whole area. And then you just get assigned a spot. You tie your hammock up and put your mattress, spread it out, and everything else. Get ready for bed that night. And your sea bag carried all your personal belongings. That was usually put at the head of the bed or the
The head of the bunk there?
yeah, no, not the bunk, but the hammock.
The hammock, okay. So you actually stayed in a hammock type?
Oh, yes.
Really? Okay.
In fact, it was terrible because Newport, Rhode Island is a very cold place, and it's right there on the ocean. So I can remember sleeping away. Oh, I was so comfortable, wrapped up in that hammock and blanket and sleeping away, and all of a sudden I could feel club hitting me underneath. All right, you're on watch, get up. So, you think nothing of it, just roll out of the hammock and you drop down. It's about 4 feet or more down. And when I hit the ground, I was ankle deep in snow. And I looked around, the whole area is covered with snow. And of course there were glass windows that were broken. And in those days the Navy was poor. There's no denying it. I mean, they couldn't even replace those glass windows. And if you, as a recruit, took a piece of cardboard, like if you got a cake or something from home or anything, you put it in there, block that, then you'd go march for a couple hours to work it off, because you don't do things like that. So you kind of suffered that way. And
It was cold for you to get out there in the middle of the night. Now, at the end of your training, what is your rank now at the end of basic training there at Newport?
Seaman, 2nd class.
And is it a general rank? You don't have specific training yet?
Nothing.
No specific school or training? You've just been through the training?
You're seaman. Yeah.
Seaman. Did you actually go out and do any ocean on a ship to do any of your training? No?
No.
All basic, all learning, all... Was it physical exercising?
Yes, yes, mostly physical. The physical exercise and drilling, marching. Well, we did go out to the rifle range twice, I guess it was, and qualify shooting.
Now, the San Diego trip, had you requested to become a radio operator, or did they know that was from...
Well, see, I'd been in Smith School for electrician. Plus I went to Eastern Radio Institute. So by comparison, I stood out from everybody else that joined the Navy. Because in those days, you have to understand that if a youngster committed a crime and he went before the judge and the sentence was, say, 6 years in prison, then the judge would give him the opportunity, join the Navy after you've done 6 years duty and you get an honorable discharge. Bring that back and we'll clean your record, so you'll never have a record of having been arrested also. So we had a lot of those kind of characters in there. So, I had technical training. Most of them didn't know anything. So, they'd get in the ship's office and they'd look at my file and they said, "You're going to school." And so
They saw your file and then you're going to go to school.
I ended up going to San Diego.
How did you get to San Diego?
Train.
Did you go by yourself?
No. Whole group of us. There were maybe 12 or so of us. We had this big sleeper, and we just stayed in there all the way across.
Now, was it you were in on a civilian train, but with fellow Navy personnel? Were you in uniform as you traveled across the country?
Yes.
You were in a Pullman?
Yes.
And where did the train leave from on its way to San Diego? Do you remember?
Providence.
Providence, Rhode Island? Mm-hmm. And you took the train all the way across the United States?
Right.
How long did it take you to get from Providence to San Diego? Do you remember?
Several days and nights.
How was your trip? How was your trip in general?
Beautiful, because they used to have just the start of USO during those times, and every time a military train would stop somewhere, like Tucson, Arizona. We stopped there, and lo and behold, there's a USO group, and they had coffee and donuts, and so it was a real break.
When you got to San Diego, who met you in San Diego? Do you remember?
No, we just got met by some petty officer who met the train and got us on a truck, and then they trucked us into base San Diego.
And do you remember the time of day you got into San Diego?
Probably about 11 o'clock in the morning or so.
And where did you go in San Diego? Where was the base? Is it the Navy base?
Yes, it's right there. Same. It's where the Marine Corps Navy base were side by side.
Okay. Is the climate, was it much different from what you were used to?
Oh yes, it's beautiful.
What time of year was that, Henry, when you arrived in San Diego? Do you remember?
April, I guess it was.
April 41.
Yes.
Now, at that point, you're just 18 years old, correct? You're right. You just turned 18.
Yeah.
So now you're in. You've arrived in San Diego, and you're going to do what in San Diego?
To radio. They had a communications school that just opened up. It was beautiful, brand new, and so I went there to learn. They had a manual called DNC-5, Dog Charlie numeral 5, which was a Bible for communicators. And so we studied that, and then not only did we have to learn to be proficient in handling communications, messages and everything else, but the Morse code, you had to know at least 12 words per minute in order to qualify, otherwise you'd go to sea and you'd never get to be a radio striker. So after you finished that, you ended up with a little marker that you sewed onto your shirt, which was a series of bolts of lightning, and that indicated that you were a radioman striker. So that's the only distinction. No change in pay or anything else. Yeah. Okay.
The quarters. Where did you live in San Diego?
Oh, it's beautiful. Just brand new. I mean, the quarters were just out of this world. I mean, they were just fantastic. I mean, the shower facilities, the bathroom facilities, the sleeping facilities, the place where you could do your clothes, scrub your clothes, because you learn to scrub your clothes in salt water and saltwater soap and all that, and then rinse them in clear water. And of course that carried on when you went aboard ship at sea. And so came weekends. The weekends were your own, so if you thought you were caught up in your schooling and everything else, then you're free to go to San Diego, into the town, which we did quite often, and it was beautiful. Had a great big zoo in there, so most of the boys and I'd get dressed up and everything else, and catch a bus and go into San Diego and visit the zoo or go to, I remember, no, that was later. So I'll never forget, I stopped with these boys and I said, hey, here's a nice picture. I'd like to take a photograph of this and send it to my mother and dad all dressed up in uniform. So I went ahead and mailed it, and it was a nice picture, except it was a funeral home.
Really?
And they kidded me about that, what a picture to send them. Then I finished school, and I had no trouble in school because of all that background and technical training compared to the others. The only people that competed against me were radio amateurs, but they did more damage than good in the fleet because they thought they knew everything, and they'd change after some contractor would spend thousands of dollars to developing this circuit. Then they decided, I don't think they'd pull it out and change it. Then there'd be all kinds of trouble because the equipment didn't work and all that. But
How long were you in San Diego for the radio school?
I think 3 months, 4 months.
3 months.
Yeah.
Made
And
you...
then while I was there, because it was a new school, they went to Hollywood, the Navy did, and got all of the leading band players and Kay Kaiser and they got all the comedians, George Burns, Gracie Allen, everybody else, to come in and put a show on for us. But we only had a certain size amphitheater and stuff, so there were a limited number of tickets, and fortunately I got selected to get a ticket. And that's when it really hit me. I just sat there and with all these people, and all of a sudden they started to play the Star Spangled Banner, and everybody stood up and saluted, and the screen opened up, and the flag was probably, I still think it was 40 feet by 20 feet. It was the biggest thing I've ever seen, in all the lights, and they just, the old heart pounding.
Oh, that's
I'm in the Navy. And so the show went on, and after the show, it was a beautiful presentation. And after it was all over, the next day, of course, the officers took these people, toured them around the base, and I had my camera, so Ginny Sims came by with the captain of the base, and so I went over and I said, "May I have your picture?" And she said, "Oh yes." And boy, Cat was getting all dressed up, straightened out and everything. I said, "No, I'd like to have her alone." And so he kind of moved aside, and I took her picture. And then I said, "Would you take one of she and I together?" But anyway, then Harry Babbitt, Ishka Bibble, all these people, I just took pictures like crazy and sent them home, Those were the big things in those days.
Your parents must have loved getting that from you.
Yeah.
The days at during training days, did you go to school from Monday to Friday?
Yes.
Typically?
Yes. Oh, yes. It was
Right there on the base?
Yes.
And you get up in the morning at what time?
You got up by 6, then you went to chow, and then after chow, about 8 o'clock, they'd give you about 2 hours to get up and go to chow and get back to class. And 8 o'clock, you'd be in class till 11, and then you'd have 11:30, and then you'd be off till 12:30 or 1 o'clock, then go back to school again, and 4 o'clock. About 4 o'clock it'd be over with. You go back to barracks and study or whatever you had to do.
At the end of that training period, what did you receive that signified? Well, you already talked a little about it. Did you get
The little Sharon.
the Sharon?
Yeah.
And
No, not a Sharon, but a little,
the-
looked like lightning
the lightning
rods.
bolt.
Bolts, yeah.
Yes,
Just
sir.
sewed on it was the size of a $50 or so.
So it's about June of '41. Where are you then sent?
Then I was sent out to Pearl Harbor,
How'd you get to Pearl Harbor?
aboard the USS Wharton, Wharton. She was a troop transport.
Was it crowded?
Oh yes, yeah.
Still, any sense that the U.S. might be pulled into war at this time? Do you recall?
None whatsoever. Just peace, tranquility, just a beautiful world.
How long did it take you to get from San Diego to Pearl Harbor?
Several days and nights.
What were your accommodations like on the ship?
4 high bunk beds.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it was just a wire mesh for the bed, and then you took your sea bag and everything else, and you and mattress, and you made your own bed and all that. And then you drew watches. For example, I ended up being captain of the head, meaning that I had to wash all the urinals and all the basins, mirrors and all that stuff. And then once in a while you'd get, I only got it once, was climb up to the main mast and go across to the crow's nest and just sit there as the lookout. Not that you did anything or anything, just this is part of your training, you know, and learn what it's all about.
Was that your first time on a ship, by the way? Going from San Diego to Pearl Harbor?
My golly, that's right, it was.
Probably was, wasn't it?
Yes.
Ironically enough. Now, when you get to Pearl Harbor, describe a Pearl Harbor. Describe getting there. Describe what it's like there.
Well, you know, there was so much confusion, and you were kind of lost in the crowd. You got this big sea bag with your bedding and everything else all over on your shoulder, and you're marching wherever they tell you to go and all this. And so I ended up on the USS Dixie, which was a destroyer tender.
Why? Do you know?
Well, that's to be further assigned. In other words, it was a destroyer tender, meaning that it took, it did every bit of work that needed to be done on destroyers, short of having to go into the yard. In other words, if the ship's crew couldn't repair something, then you went alongside a destroyer tender who had parts, machine shops, they had everything, experts to help you. And not only for that reason, but they also had accommodations for waiting for your permanent assignment. And that's what I did. I went there and waited until finally they woke me up, and I said, "Yeah, what's up?" And they said, "Get dressed, you're going to your ship." Oh, golly. So I dressed up, got everything to my clothes and my sea bag and everything on my shoulder, and marched down, and I looked down and I see this 350 written on the motor whaleboat. Well, that's where I was going, to the USS Hull, which is 350. So I climb in a boat and we take off, and 20 minutes later we pull alongside, and I get my stuff and I get on board, and there's this seaman, first class, greets me, and he says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm reporting aboard." So looks at my orders, and he says, "Just leave your stuff here and I'll be right back." So it turns out that everybody was back on a fantail watching a movie, and so you know, there's only the seaman of the watch and I don't know who else, but you know, up on the forecastle where they'd greet anybody coming and going. So he came back and he says, "Okay, let me show you where to go." And so he helps me with my thing. We go down into the galley where people eat their meals, and along the bulkheads were beds that were chained up, and you just drop one down, and threw my stuff into it and got undressed and jumped into bed and went to sleep. Everybody's at the movie, and finally I wake up in the morning, I could hear dishes rattling and everything else, and I look over the side, and there I could see people finishing eating. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do now? I wish somebody would have woke me up and said, "Hey, you got to get ready to..." But anyway, so I pushed the blanket back and looked, and this one boy looked up at me and he said, "Hey, you knew?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "We better get dressed up, hurry up and get something to eat, because we're going to close the mess hall down." So I jumped out of my bunk and got dressed up and ran up into the shower room, washed my face, and ran up, come running back. And sure enough, there was still time to eat, so I finished eating, and then what do? You just go back, sit on a lower bunk and wait for somebody to come or something and tell you what to do, because you don't know anybody, you don't know anything. And so I'm sitting there and all of a sudden I hear these whistles blow and everything else. And men getting underway group, meaning we're getting ready to leave port. I was surprised, because I turned to one of the guys and I said, "Where are we headed?" "Oh, we're going to San Diego."
Really?
Yeah, and so that was my first voyage and it was no fun, because I was extremely seasick all the time. In fact, I got so bad one time I hung over the side and I didn't have anything else to throw up, so some sailor came to me and he says, "Why don't you go to the galley and get some tomato juice and some soda crackers? That'll settle your stomach." So I get over there, and sure enough, cook gave me some soda crackers and a little glass of tomato juice, and so I drank that. And within 3 or 4 minutes, there I was, chucking it all up. But it looked like it was blood, and I was hemorrhaging. And so some petty officer grabbed a hold of me and says, "Get him down to sick bay." So they rushed me down to sick bay, and I'm laying there, yeah. Then they called a guy, I'll never forget it, Doc Morley was his name. He was a first-class pharmacist mate. He came down, and he says, "What's the matter, what's the matter?" He says, "He's hemorrhaging." An old doctor just rubs his hand across my face. He says, "Oh, that's tomato juice. Get him out of here." So they lugged me out of there and put me up on a forecastle where it was worse than anything, but at least I got over it, and I found a first-class gunner mate, Carl Kopp was his name, who was seasick as I was all the time, and so I learned to follow him and see where he's going to go, so I could end up being comfortable like I hoped he was, because he was already a first-class gunner's mate, so he was really somebody.
So did you gradually overcome your seasickness over the days that you were cruising back to San Diego?
I don't know. I never got sick, to my knowledge. I remember after I went to University of Michigan, got commissioned and all that stuff. So for some reason, I settled down. But prior to that, every time the ship would move or anything else, man, and guys used to rib me. I'd be sitting at the typewriter, copying the messages, and all of a sudden the ship would start moving. And some of the guys even go so far as go down a galley and get a fistful of butter, soft butter. And they'd come out and they'd say, "How you feeling, Rap? Do you feel you're going to throw up?"
Jeez.
I'd throw up on a typewriter and stuff. It was crazy.
Now, did you, on the hull, on your first voyage back from Pearl Harbor, where are your quarters? Where are you assigned on the hull?
I finally got quarters on the fantail with the communications division. I had the second bunk from the deck. There were four bunks, and I was the second one. And then I had a locker.
How many sailors are on the hull? How many?
We were way undermanned. There's so many empty spaces, quarters. The people don't realize how badly off the military was. They show in the History Channel about people training at Fort Dix with broomsticks instead of guns and all that, because that's the way it was. We couldn't afford guns. We couldn't afford all these things. And so we had we were lucky if we had 100 men aboard ship, where we should have had maybe 150 or more.
Now, the trip back to San Diego, this is still the summer of 41?
Yes.
And then where did you go after that?
We went back to Pearl Harbor and did a lot of going to sea and drills and practices and exercises, general quarters.
Was it just the hull, or were you with other ships doing that kind of?
The hull was a part of Destroyer Squadron 1.
Okay.
And we had a ship, the Phelps, I guess, was the squadron leader. She was a destroyer, but she was a larger destroyer. And see, destroyers had 2 or 3 missions. The basic mission was to, as they were called, greyhounds of the sea. They were the fastest thing on the ocean at the time. And we'd chase submarines. That was our number 1 mission, a submarine. Number 2 was to stay in formation and protect the men of war, meaning cruisers, battleships. If we were steaming along in formation and we looked over there and saw a torpedo coming at one of them, then we had to intercept it and get blown up to save that ship. The other thing was anti-aircraft or shore bombardment. We had dual-purpose 5-inch 38 guns, which could be used for bombarding a shore or bombarding aircraft, for any aircraft.
Hold tight. Now, we were discussing then what goes on in terms of the destroyer squadron and what the ship has and the different exercises. Yeah. And now it's still prior to December of 1941. What happens in those months, the fall of 41?
We made one trip, like I said, back to San Diego. And we came back to the Pacific, to Hawaii. And during that time we were in Hawaii, we would go out on maneuvers. They would form task forces, say about 5 destroyers and maybe a cruiser or 2. And we'd just go out and simulate, having a battle with the enemy. Now, the important thing in those days was there was no such thing or even knowledge of radar. So the only way you could do it is line of sight. Whatever your eyes saw is what was there. Other than that, you couldn't look over the horizon or anything else. And the other thing is that everything was simulated. I was, for example, mess cook. When I got into the radio division, they assigned my first job as mess cook for the division, meaning that I was like a waiter in a restaurant. I took care of all my people. What they had was, they had regular assigned seats, they had regular assigned utilities, forks, knives, cups, everything else. My job was to make sure everything was set up so when they announced chow down, that everybody just run into there, knew exactly where to sit, knew where everything, they'd just sit there and like in a restaurant. It was beautiful. And I keep telling everybody that I liked that job more than anything else, because I was making $36 a month was my pay as a seaman second class. And after about, maybe a month of being a mess cook, it got to the point where I was making more money on tips than I was getting annual salary.
Wow.
So it seemed to be real good. And so my general quarters statement, because we went to, we had an officer, Stephen Tack, I can't remember his name now, yeah. But anyway, he was a commanding officer, and he was a Naval Academy graduate, and he was gung-ho. I mean, he just made sure everything was spit and polish, and everybody knew exactly what to do in the event of hostilities and all that. And so we'd go to general quarters quite often. And of course, my general quarters station was magazine number 2, meaning I had all the projectiles and powders down in my little area that I had to feed up to gun 2 and gun 3. And they were 5-inch 38 caliber rounds, so they were about 5 inches in diameter, and they were maybe about 24 inches long. That's the projectile, and of course you had the powder casing went behind it about the same size. And so every time we go to GQ, I just run down to my battle station, and of course you'd practice, make sure you dogged down all the hatches so it would be watertight in case any place got hit. Then the water wouldn't leak throughout the ship and sink the ship. So everything was dogged down. I get down in my area and they'd dog me down, the phone would be ringing, I'd pick it up and I'd say, magazine 2, manned and ready. They'd say, okay, and I'd hang up. And that's all it amounted to. And I should have learned this in boot camp about ammunition, but I never did, you know. And so there was my first experience, December 7th, with actually having to handle and supply ammunition.
So you're saying in leading up to the ammunition, you really didn't have a lot of training doing this?
I was a radioman. I never even touched. And what happened was when December 7th rolled around, I ran down to my, when the Japs came, of course I was mess cooking, and so I had all the food and everything else all laid out. And they announced, you know, chow down, so everybody came running down to get chow and they'd sit at the table, and all of a sudden Quartermaster Striker, DeRicky was his name, who was a very close friend of mine, even is today out in San Diego. I call him up and we talk. He came running down the ladder and screaming, the Japanese are bombing us, the Japanese are bombing us. Of course, everybody just sat there and looked at each other, you know, what's he talking about? But on his back was this young boy who was probably the same age I was, 17, 18, crying away, you know, help us, help us, help us, and he's hanging on his neck, and this guy's trying to get him off. So we realized, hey, something must be going on, so everybody slowly but surely worked their way out of the mess hall, went up top side.
This is on the morning of December 7th?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're right alongside of the destroyer Dobbin, destroyer tender Dobbin, which was like a big pillar of steel alongside, so when I come around the top side, all I saw was this big hunk of steel. I looked back aft, and that was where Ford Island was, and where all the battleships were being bombed. I looked forward, and there wasn't much activity, so I decided, well, instead of running back, I'll learn forward and see what's going on. So I ran forward, and of course, here comes this Zero, you know, machine gunning the front end of the ship and everything else, and that's when it was time to raise the flag up on the forecastle, and the chief boatswain mate was up there with flag wrapped around his arm, ready to hook it up, pull it up. And here's this guy come flying by, machine gunning, so he pulls out his .45 and he's banging away just like Hood Gibson or Tim McCoy or one of those cowboys in those days. And then they sounded quarters, meaning in general quarters. Because up until then, everybody just running around, didn't know what to do, what, you know. And so they sounded general quarters. Once you heard that, all men man your battle station, then we'd run down like we did under conditions before when they sounded GQ. And so, sure enough, when I get down my battle station, can't get into my magazine because it's locked.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sit there and finally get a hold of the electrician's mate who was in the next compartment above me. And I said, how about getting a gunner's mate or somebody here so I can get into the magazine? And so he called up and they sent him a gunner's mate down, and he had wire clippers and he just clipped the locks off, opened it up. Mm-hmm. I jumped in there and we dogged me in, got me all locked up. And phone's ringing. And so usually, and that's all I did. Magazine 2, man and ready, and I hung up. Phone's ringing. Send up the ammunition. Okay, so I hung up and I look around and I see all these different projectiles, and I said, wonder what they want. Phone's ringing. Send up the ammunition. I said, well, what do you want? Anti-aircraft. Okay, so I hang up and I look around and I don't see any little tablets or anything saying anti-aircraft or bombardment or, star shells or anything else. Phone's ringing again. And he said, damn it all, get that ammunition up. How are we going to shoot these planes without ammunition? And I said, what color? Green. Thank you. And I hung up and I looked and I saw all these nice green projectiles, each one weighing about 55, 60 pounds. So I unstrap them, throw them in a magazine, hoist, and I press the button and up they go. And I said, what a relief. I did my job. Phone's ringing again. How the hell are we going to shoot these projectiles without powder? We need powder. And I said, 1 minute. And I looked over and there's a big sign and it says, do not open by order of commanding officer. And so I thought to myself, here's this seaman or petty officer, third class or something, telling me to send up all these projectiles and powder and everything else, and it says, don't open it. I said, sorry, I can't do that. Why not? I said, because there's a sign on the door that says, do not open by order of commanding officer. He said, pull the sign off and throw it on the deck. Don't you realize we're at war? So I kept thinking about it. Okay. So I hung up and I pulled the sign off and I threw it on the deck, and that's the first time that I'd ever seen the inside of a powder room. So I opened up the powder room and I look in there and hear these nice stacks of powder and everything else. And they had a special escape hatch in a door where if you were in a powder room and you were handing powder out, this thing would open and you'd push the powder through it in your clothes so you'd never get any flare back to blow up the powder room. So sure enough, I stood there and put the can of powder and pressed the button, sent it up. And then I kept looking at the door. I says, I'm not supposed to leave that open. That's got to be closed. And I said, oh hell, if the ship gets hit and we blow up, I'll be dead. What am I worried about? They can't court-martial me or anything else. I just hooked it open and kept taking turns until we got a near miss. They claim, see, the important thing about this whole affair is that the Japanese had been planning this for so long and in such secrecy. We knew nothing about it. Yet later on we found out that they had a bay or a harbor which is exact duplicate of Pearl Harbor. And they had model ships like the Lexington, the Saratoga, the Arizona, all those on the beach with piers. I mean, it was, if you took a snapshot, you'd say you were in Pearl Harbor and just took a picture of the planes. And so every pilot couldn't deviate. I mean, it didn't matter whether he was running in a string of machine gun bullets or he had an opportunity here to sink this ship. Your target is there, and that's the only one you get. And so that's what they did. And they stuck to a letter T. And so after the first run went over, the Japanese went back to their carriers, reloaded, and came back. On a second run, there was what we called target of opportunity. Because when they came back in, they looked around, everything's burning and all that stuff, so they had a choice to pick out what they wanted to bomb. Well, here we were, 5 or so ships alongside the tender. What bigger target could you ask for other than a battleship or something? Plus, we were loaded with depth charges on a fantail, so one hit would have wiped out all the destroyers, would have wiped out the destroyer tender, everything would have done away with. And so this one pilot came in to make a run, but he missed us by about 30 yards or so off the fantail. And of course it raised the ship up, and the ship shook and dropped down.
What did he drop that he was trying to hit?
Bomb.
He dropped the bomb.
Oh yeah.
Now, did you see him drop the bomb, or were you
Oh,
underneath?
no, I was in the magazine.
Yeah.
And so all I felt was the ship go up, shake and drop.
Jeez.
And I think I got knocked out, but because, you know, when I woke up, I just opened my eyes and everything just pitch black.
Henry, we're going to hold it right there because I need to change tapes. This is very good. Thanks.
Yes.
Your previous.